Face movements. So we're gonna take a look at how the face moves. There's like a million different little things about the face. Basically talk about things that at least I think about a lot when I'm animating. We're not going to go into necessarily like every specific little detail and everything, because once you get into the anatomy of it, it becomes a whole another beast that I don't really know it that well. So we're going to kind of break things down into different parts of the face and different categories. So first, we're going to talk about the speed in which things move. Generally, in the face, things are moving rather quickly, but there's kind of different speeds for different parts of the body. The eyes are generally going to be our quickest movements. We think about our eye darts; those happen over 1 or 2 frames. Then our brows typically move a little bit faster. One thing to kind of look at, if you watch yourself and you try and raise your brows slowly and lower them slowly, they kind of will kind of jitter up and down a little bit. It's hard for them to move slow. They're kind of quick trigger muscles. And then our mouth can move rather smoothly and slowly. So the speeds can be slower or quicker, much more variety in the mouth. So our eyes, the pupils and lids move very quickly. I think the pupils tend to move probably the quickest. Generally they're going to be kind of darting around over 1 or 2 frames. The only time in which your eyes are going to kind of move relatively smoothly is if you're tracking an object moving. Let's say, though, your character is looking from left to right, but they're not watching something move across in front of them. If they're just moving their eyes left to right, they're going to jump in these sort of 1 or 2 frame movements. And that's because your eyes are locking. They have to kind of lock onto something. They look at something. So they'll be jumping from thing to thing as you move your eyes across. So if you ever have a character following something, like let's say, I remember once when I was in school, I animated a character like with his head on the table and he was like flicking a pencil and it was rolling, coming down. And that I had it move smoothly because it was tracking. But if your character was just panning across the room, they'd have to do those little tick, 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 tick movements. Your lids are going to be moving quickly, as they track and move with your eyeball, they're going to move in a relatively similar speed. And our blinks are going to be quick. Generally, when the lids come down, we're going to do those the quickest. They're going to move quicker. And then the ups can have a little bit slower of movement. And it's good to offset those 2 timings, having the lids coming down quicker in fewer frames than them coming up. It will help relieve the robotic feeling that we can get with facial and eye movements in animation. Brows can move. So brows, we're talking again speed, and the brows can move slower than the eyes, but they're still relatively sharp. But we can kind of move them slower if we want to, but it's not exactly the easiest thing to do. Like I was saying earlier, it kind of has a little bit more jumpy of movements. You generally probably aren't going to be doing that too much. I've kind of noticed that the brow movements have a wider range, usually maybe like 3 to 10 frames, but it really depends. We just don't want them to get too soft and mushy. We want them to still be rather crisp in their spacing, a little more sharp and snappy per se. But unlike the eyes, like the rule is not as harsh or strict of a rule. So let's take a look at some brow movements here. But yeah, let's just take a look at some of these incredible 2 brow movements. And we're really just going to kind of look at the speed in which these things move. But you can see here, these brows, they're still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they're locked in there. So that one was like 4 5 5. You can really see how it's a rather snappy transition. And it's pretty simple. Like they're not doing incredibly complicated things with the brows. I think we've talked about how like the outer part of the brow tends to be a little more still. It doesn't have a wide of up and down range as say the inner part of the brow. Yeah, even on Violet's little brow movements, they're generally pretty quick. Then also a nice thing we're going to talk a little bit about later is how they're kind of supported with the lids. They're not this isolated movement. I bet if we look over back at the dash clip or dash shot, we'll see that as well when he drops his lids down or his brows down. We should be able to see a little bit of, not too much, but there's a little bit of lid movement. I mean, to be honest, it would probably be good for them to add a bit of that in there. Cool. So the mouth, this one has all kinds of speeds. Again, like just in general with the face, just keeping things a little snappier and a little tighter. The mouth, a lot of times, like when we're dealing with lip sync, the lip sync dictates it for us, the speed of things. So that's kind of nice. So the lip sync is also going to really speed things up. There's a lot when people talk fast, it's going to be difficult. So we're going to talk next week about lip sync. So a lot of this is kind of going to be more covered next week. One thing we're going to talk about is trying to live within an expression more and not be changing the whole pose of the mouth because we're going in and out of all these different shapes. So keep that in mind. Some shapes do have some timing necessities, I guess, and that being things like MBP shapes with our lips come together and compress. We're going to want to hold those for at least 2 frames. Otherwise, they're not really going to read. That is less of like a mechanical issue and more of an animation readability issue. Some other things to take note of is try not to have the mouth open up for just 1 frame and then close. Again, you're just not really going to read it. It's just going to flash. You need some time to read that the mouth is open. So sometimes in instances where you're hearing all these different sounds and you need to get your lip sync in, what that could mean is your closed shapes don't have to be all the way closed. Sometimes they can stay a little open and you'll still get that same effect in getting that lip sync to read. If you don't have the frames, you don't always have to close the mouth all the way. And anytime your mouth moves very slowly, which it can, it's going to feel more deliberate. So if you have a character who is going into a smile and it's really slow, it's going to be something that's not just driven by emotional reaction, but more internally from the character specifically trying to smile slowly. So it's going to feel more deliberate. So keep that in mind as well.